like to introduce Joseph, Amitabh, and Nick with Children's Services Council.
Thanks, Bridget. Now we're going to move from Nassau County to Palm Beach County. So the story of this project is one about mothers. It's about their children and giving those children the healthy start in life that they deserve, irrespective of their race or the socioeconomic status of their parents. For Palm Beach, the governmental entity that has been tasked with this undertaking is the Children's Services Council. For more than 30 years, the CC has provided leadership, funding, and services to help to ensure that the children of Palm Beach grow up to be healthy, strong, safe from abuse and neglect, and that they are ready for the first day of their formal education in kindergarten. To illustrate the scope of services that CSC has in Palm Beach, let's take a look at this gradation map. Here we can see the distribution of mothers and children enrolled in CSC services, where the darker shades indicate the areas where there's a higher concentration of mothers and children utilizing those services. Expectant mothers begin their journey with the CSC through prenatal and motherhood services, of which there are 42 programs. They include Centering, Healthy Families, and Prenatal Plus. Post-birth, there are 29 child and family programs that are available. Excuse me. They include Nurse-Family Partnership, Counseling, and Triple P. That said, some of these programs actually overlap on this timeline. Take, for instance, the Nurse-Family Partnership. This program partners first-time mothers with registered nurses during their pregnancy, and they receive ongoing home visits up until the child's second birthday. In addition to proving pregnancy outcomes, the child's health and development are given special focus. Moreover, the program works to empower these first-time mothers by enhancing their self-sufficiency, and which means helping them find work and continue their education. Our partnership with the CC enabled us to analyze and determine what types and combinations of programs and services yielded the best birth and child outcomes. As you can see from this graphic, we worked with a lot of data, approximately 27,000 individual child records, more than 500 variables of interest, and to make things a little more complicated, the data was also semi-longitudinal, ranging from 2012 to 2018. The data or the information we worked with consisted of birth vital statistics, prenatal and infant risk screens, postpartum depression risk screens, program enrollment data, and school district data. Now to discuss our birth outcome analysis, I'm going to hand things off to my colleague, Amitabh.
Thank you, Nick, for letting us a brief introduction about the CSC. Now, let us talk about the childbirth outcome and the contribution of CSC towards the healthy childbirth. Why do you think it is important to discuss over here the childbirth outcome? It is important because a healthy child will directly lead to a high kindergarten readiness for the child. We basically dealt with two types of pregnant mothers. The blue group are the mothers who were at low risk. And we have the orange group of the mothers who are at very high risk. And eventually, these mothers who have very high pregnancy risk are the mothers who eventually enroll to CSC program. Now the question is, how do we compare them? Initially, we tried to take the success rate of these mothers, compare the group of the orange group with the blue group, and try to tell that what is the success rate of the two different groups. You know what the results are? The results are nearly same. What that means? Does that mean that CSC have less contribution towards a healthy childbirth? At this juncture, we found out that there is something we are doing wrong, and that was the selection bias. We tried to compare two different groups. To get rid of the selection bias, we tried to do a propensity score matching. I'm going to tell about this with the details in the next animation slides. So here we have two different groups of heterogeneous groups of the mothers. We see here that the mothers have high risk. Most of these mothers go and get enrolled to the CSC for some sort of assistance. whereas the mothers who are not enrolled to CSC don't have so much of birth risk. So with propensity score, we try to match this group and bring them to a homogeneous category. Now we have a probability score where we can compare the two groups of mothers and get the statistical scores. What are the engineered features to this model? Our hypothesis was the distance of the mother from the hospital could be a vital factor to this model, wherein the longer the distance is, there could be a possibility of a bad outcome for the childbirth. The duration of enrollment to the CSC program also has the second engineered feature. We have been talking about healthy child outcome. What are the metrics towards this? We considered a baby birth weight. If it is minimum of 2,500 grams, that is 5.5 pounds, and the gestation week of the mother to be minimum of 37 weeks, the composite factor of these two lead to a healthy childbirth. Now, once this model is ready and we computed the propensity score, what are the results say? We see here that by getting enrolled to CSC program, a mother could bring up the healthy child outcome from 85% to 98%. That is 13% rise. In a different measure, we saw that childbirth weight of 3,120 grams increased to 3,400 grams. That is more than half a pound rise, and which is 10%. Don't you feel this is significant contribution for the CSC, from the CSC? Thank you. Well, now we have to answer the bigger question. We have to, as Nick told, we have to recommend that which program is really contributing towards a better outcome. What we did? We took those mothers and grouped them into 7 different dimensions. The dimensions were the mothers at high pregnancy risk, mothers who had depression, mothers of different race, marriage status, education, and two different other categories. What we found, if we took one dimension of the education, we found that low educated mothers get benefited by centering program. In fact, the 95% of the less educated mothers could turn their high risk of pregnancy to a healthy childbirth by getting enrolled to centering program. We are going to hand over this data to our client to make further analysis and make use of this data. Now I hand over to Joseph to talk about the child outcome.
Thank you, Amitabh. So, when we refer to our child outcome analysis, what we're predominantly concerned with is this window of time here. The child has already been born, and his or her mother has already employed some sort of family-targeted program or child-based targeted program, and we wanted to measure the effects of those programs on kindergarten readiness, which is one of CSC's core goals. And the way that we defined kindergarten readiness was a combination of assessment scores, literacy scores, and some social and emotional dimensions. So when we actually computed that composite score, we went and we looked at the data, and overall we saw that about 36%, or rather 64%, were underachieving. So a little bit of a problem. So what we did is we employed a logistic regression, and we considered multiple variables, and we found that CSC enrollment was actually indicating and contributing to a 25% reduction in the odds of a good kindergarten outcome. Very counterintuitive. But much like we saw in the birth outcomes analysis, there was a selection bias at play here. CSC targets at-risk mothers and children, so they will predominantly be, they'll be predisposed rather to those worse outcomes, and this was biasing our analysis. So, what did we do? Again, we employed propensity score matching, and we went back and we reran the exact same logistic regression. This time it was saying that there was about a 0% reduction. It was small enough to be negligible. So we had to sit back and think for a minute and say, well, maybe general enrollment's not the thing to consider here. This was too simple of a model. We were getting feedback from our community partners that, yeah, there's programs that do have these benefits, and we weren't capturing that level of detail. So we needed to go a little bit further. And so what we did was we actually decided to look at modeling individual assessment scores using a linear regression. And what we wanted to do was also consider the effect of individual programs and program enrollments, as well as combinations of program enrollments. And what we actually found is, if you remember in that initial slide, there's on the order of about 70 or so total programs that CSC funds. So if we were to actually try to construct this model, we did, we would have needed over 8 million parameters. So the way that we approached the wicked problem that we were posed with needed to change, because we didn't have the tools to really look at it. And from our analysis as it was progressing, we saw the initial approach wasn't telling us enough, and then the second approach was going to tell us too much. So what we did is we used some logic and our intuition, and we figured out that not all those programs are meaningful. Those combinations of programs are not necessarily meaningful. Some mothers may not enroll in one particular program. And so we looked and we saw that most mothers enrolled their child in just one program, tops 4. So we decided to go back and we reran the linear regression just looking at combinations of 4 or less programs. And we found some meaningful results, but there's still too much noise and overlap in the data. So again, we needed to do something different to attack this problem. So that's when we took a step back and we let the data talk for itself. And we utilized a latent class analysis on the combination of all the services the mother was enrolled in and potentially all those services that the child was enrolled in. And we found that there's actually 5 meaningful clusters and patterns of program utilization. And these clusters were meaningful in that, 1, we extracted a natural comparison group that corresponded to no enrollment. We also extracted these other clusters that contributed and showed various patterns of usage, but the nifty thing about these is that the average risk within each cluster increased with cluster number. Moreover, there was a tendency for these clusters to be made up of disadvantaged minority groups. So, with this in mind, we have simplified the dimensions that we were analyzing. We went from looking at almost 8 million to looking at 5. Pretty good. So we decided to control for risk and then run a logistic regression on each of the assessment scores like we initially did, but this time we used the program clusters. And what we saw was that while CSC enrollment doesn't necessarily show leaps and bounds improvements, but there is a risk threshold that once is passed, CSC enrolled students will outperform their non-enrolled peers. So much so that when you average the benefit over the highest risk group, cluster 5 sees almost a 10-point marginal increase in test scores. Cluster 2, 6-point marginal increase. And this holds for all the assessments that were taken on these children. So we took our results and we compiled them and we came up with a list of recommendations that we're going to provide to CSC. But the main thing that we're walking away from here is that CSC's mission is really an important social investment. And the return on that investment is healthy children that grow into functioning adults and improving the quality of lives of families in the Palm Beach County area. With our analysis, we were successful in showing that for at-risk mothers and children, their services that they provide and fund are doing their mission. Our recommendations, because we were short on time, was that our analysis needs to be reconducted and more rigorously incorporate the nature of time. With that, that's my time. I would like to thank you for listening.